The first chapter of Blades of Intolerance sets the emotional foundation for the story, immersing the reader in a reality that blends an apparently ordinary life with subtle racism and the consequences it has on a black family. The story begins with the routine of Anna and her son, Raphael, on a Saturday morning. Anna is a strong and hardworking woman who bears the weight of raising Raphael on her own. She works as a nurse at a public hospital in Santa Cruz, a small town deeply rooted in conservative traditions. With a resilient personality, Anna always makes it a habit to hold her head high, even when she senses the judgmental looks while walking through the more privileged neighborhoods of the city. On this day, she decides it's time to take 12-year-old Raphael for a more formal haircut, an entirely new experience for him. Raphael, on the other hand, is a joyful boy, full of life and dreams. He loves soccer, dreams of becoming a professional player, and doesn't yet notice the subtle shades of racism that weave through his mother's life. For him, going to the barbershop is exciting. After all, he wants to get a cool, stylish haircut to show off to his friends at school. He knows that Gomez Barbershop is famous in town, where respected men go to get their hair cut and talk about soccer, politics, and business. For Raphael, this visit is almost like a rite of passage, being treated like a man. As they arrive downtown, Anna and Raphael walk along the cobblestone streets, observing the stores and the few cars moving slowly through the area. There is a clear contrast between the neighborhoods they live in and the city center, where the population is predominantly white and more affluent. Although racism is something Anna has experienced in many forms, she didn't expect to be confronted so directly and brutally that day. When they enter the barbershop, the environment seems welcoming at first: brown leather chairs, large mirrors, the constant buzz of hair clippers, and lively conversations about soccer and politics. Antonio Gomez, the owner of the barbershop, is in the middle of a discussion about the local team's last game with a loyal customer. Antonio is a white man in his 60s, with a thick mustache and a proud posture, known for being traditional and having conservative opinions. He has owned the barbershop for decades and has a loyal clientele, mainly middle-aged white men. The moment Anna and Raphael step inside, the atmosphere shifts. The chatter dies down, and the eyes of the men in the shop fall on them. There's a subtle, but heavy pause in the interaction. Anna is used to this kind of reception, although Raphael hasn't yet developed the awareness to understand why these people are looking at them differently. He, excited about the haircut, walks toward one of the chairs, but before he can sit down, Anna decides to be polite and approaches the barber. "Good morning, Mr. Gomez, I'd like you to cut my son Raphael's hair," she says with a smile, trying to keep the conversation light. Antonio, who had been smiling and relaxed with his other customers, suddenly looks visibly uncomfortable when he glances at Raphael. The smile disappears from his face instantly, and he adjusts his mustache with a stern expression. The silence in the barbershop deepens, and the other men glance sideways, as if waiting to see how the situation will unfold. Without looking up at Anna, Antonio replies curtly and harshly, "I don't cut black hair." The words echo through the small barbershop like a punch. Anna, although used to dealing with more subtle forms of discrimination, is caught off guard by the bluntness of the rejection. The air seems heavier, and time feels like it has stopped. Raphael, not fully understanding the magnitude of the situation, looks at his mother in confusion, as if trying to process what just happened. To him, it doesn't make sense, he just wanted to get a haircut. The mind of a 12-year-old boy couldn't yet grasp the depth of the racism that was beginning to shape how the world would see him. Anna, however, understands exactly what is happening. She takes a deep breath and, with her heart racing, tries to remain calm in front of her son. She knows that her reaction in this moment would be a lesson for Raphael on how to face the many injustices he would still encounter in his life. Though she wanted to scream, argue, and fight back against the barber's attitude, she knew it wasn't safe to do so in that space. The situation was far from ideal, and confronting Antonio could put both her and Raphael at greater risk, especially considering the town's history of supporting such racist behavior. She decides to stand up with dignity and, with her head held high, makes one last attempt. Are you sure? My son just wants a haircut, we're not asking for anything more than your service. Antonio, with the same coldness as before, replies without even looking her in the eyes, I already said, I don't cut black hair. This place isn't for you. The blow is deep, but Anna doesn't allow herself to crumble in front of her son. With tears beginning to well up in her eyes, she gently takes Raphael's hand and leads him out of the barbershop. As they step outside, the weight of the humiliation is almost crushing, but Anna fights hard to hide it from Raphael. Once outside, the cold wind contrasts sharply with the burning pain she feels inside. She kneels on the sidewalk next to Raphael, who is still confused, and hugs him tightly. He looks at his mother with wide eyes, searching for an explanation. Mom, why did he say that? What did I do wrong? Anna, her heart broken, responds with a shaky voice, trying to find words that could explain the injustice without destroying her son's innocence. You didn't do anything wrong, my love. He's the one who's wrong. The problem is with him, not with you. Some people, they judge others by the color of their skin, and that's very wrong. You are perfect just the way you are. Raphael, though still not fully understanding, senses his mother's sadness and remains silent. The embrace between them is heavy with shared pain, the pain of being rejected for something that cannot be changed. It is in this moment that Raphael begins to awaken to the harsh reality that being black in that society meant facing invisible, yet deeply painful, barriers. The scene ends with Anna firmly holding Raphael's hand as they walk back home, leaving behind the barbershop that, for them, had become a symbol of prejudice. Anna knows that this was only the first of many challenges they would face together, but she also knows that from that moment on, she would have to teach Raphael how to survive in a world that often didn't want them around. News about what happened at the barbershop quickly spreads through the town. Some residents, like Luis, the owner of a small grocery store, show solidarity with Anna and Raphael, but others prefer not to get involved, thinking it was just a misunderstanding. Anna decides to take action. The next day, she goes to the police station to file a formal complaint against Antonio Gomez. Carlos, the town's police chief, a white man and a personal friend of Gomez, tries to downplay the situation. Anna, I know this was an unpleasant situation, but Antonio is a good man. He's never been in trouble before. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, Carlos says, trying to close the matter. Anna, furious, shoots back, it wasn't a misunderstanding, Chief. He refused to cut my son's hair because he's black. That's racism, and racism is a crime. The police chief sighs, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but Anna doesn't back down. She insists on filing the complaint, even though she knows it would be difficult to get justice in a town where most people preferred to sweep racism under the rug. Meanwhile, at Raphael's school, the incident begins to echo among the students. Some classmates start making cruel jokes about how he couldn't get a haircut at the town's most popular barbershop. However, Julia, a white girl and the daughter of a local businessman, who had always been friends with Raphael, starts to distance herself, pressured by her family, who disapprove of her friendship with the boy. The weight of prejudice begins to manifest in ways Raphael had never imagined. The small offenses, the disdainful looks, and even friends who gradually pull away. Raphael feels increasingly isolated but finds support in his mother and a local activist group that begins to mobilize against Antonio Gomez's behavior. Anna, determined not to let what happened be forgotten, joins the activist group led by Marcos, a university professor who has been organizing discussions on racism and equality in the town. The group, made up of people of different races, decides to organize a peaceful protest in front of Gomez's barbershop to raise awareness of the racism Raphael had faced. However, the protest is met with hostility by many residents. Some people in the town, like Mrs. Clara, an influential elderly woman, claim that the group is exaggerating and causing trouble. The atmosphere becomes increasingly tense, with the town divided between those who support Anna and Raphael's fight and those who believe that racism isn't a real problem there. The protest attracts the attention of the local media, and Rafael's case gains notoriety. Gomez, on the other hand, refuses to apologize or admit any wrongdoing. He says he has the right to choose his clients and sees nothing wrong with his actions. At this point, the story takes a new turn with the arrival of an unexpected figure, Laura, Antonio Gomez's daughter, who had always lived far from the town. She returns to visit her father, and upon discovering what happened, she begins to question the racist attitudes that had always been passed down in the family. With Laura's arrival, the plot delves deeper into family conflicts. Laura, who had studied in a big city and developed a more progressive mindset, returns to visit her father, Antonio Gomez. She is unaware of the incident, but when she finds out, she is horrified. Laura had always had a difficult relationship with Antonio, who was extremely controlling and prejudiced, something she had begun to reject throughout her life. Now, confronted with the reality that her father refused to cut a black boy's hair, she feels the need to act. "Dad, what you did is wrong. How can you treat a boy like that just because of his skin color?" she asks, her voice a mix of anger and disappointment. Antonio, visibly uncomfortable with all the negative attention the barbershop has been receiving, replies coldly, "I have the right to choose who I serve. This is my barbershop, my rules." Laura is astonished by her father's inability to see the error in his ways and decides she can no longer remain silent. She begins to get involved with the activist group led by Marcos and Ana, which increases the tension between her and Antonio. The conflict between father and daughter grows, and Antonio starts to realize that his actions are affecting not only his reputation in the town but also his relationship with his own family. As the protest movement grows, Rafael continues to face difficulties at school. The hostility from some classmates intensifies, and he becomes the target of racist jokes. The situation becomes unbearable when Rafael is attacked by 3 white classmates, who justify the assault by saying that he and his mother are causing trouble for the town. This physical assault marks a breaking point for Ana. Desperate for justice, Ana confronts the school authorities, but just like at the police station, she receives evasive responses. Feeling powerless against a system that seems to devalue her fight, she becomes more determined than ever to continue, even if it means going against the whole town. Meanwhile, Antonio's barbershop begins to suffer a boycott from many younger, more conscious residents. Gomez, who had never faced such a direct challenge to his business, sees his finances start to take a hit. However, instead of reconsidering his actions, he adopts an even more aggressive stance, blaming Ana and the activists for destroying his life. In one of the meetings with the activists, Laura discovers something shocking. Upon digging deeper into the town's history, she finds documents and reports revealing that her grandfather, Antonio Gomez's father, was involved with white supremacist groups decades ago. This family secret had been buried over time, but Antonio's attitudes now seem to be a direct reflection of this past. Laura, devastated by this discovery, decides to confront her father once more. Now she understands that Antonio's racism isn't just a matter of personal choice, but a dark legacy passed down from her family. "Dad, what you did to Rafael and this town isn't entirely your fault. But you have the power to change it. You can't keep living like this, trapped in this hate," she says, hoping that he can change. Antonio, however, is unable to deal with this truth. He refuses to accept that his father was involved in something so violent and prejudiced. Antonio's denial is the final straw for Laura, who decides to break ties with him completely. As the protests and the boycott of the barbershop intensify, Antonio begins to receive threats from radical groups in the town who support his racist actions. They see him as some kind of hero, defending traditional values. Antonio, now cornered on all sides, begins to fear for his safety. However, the real threat comes from an unexpected source. Among Antonio's supporters is a man named Pedro, a local businessman who has always been discreet but had strong ties to extremist groups. He offers Antonio financial support to keep the barbershop open, but on the condition that Antonio helps cover up other racist activities happening in the town. At this moment, Antonio realizes that his hatred and racism have led him to a dangerous place, where he is being manipulated by people with even darker agendas. The 8th chapter marks the decisive turning point, where the tensions that have been building throughout the story finally reach their limit. The town of Santa Cruz, already divided by racial and ideological issues, is about to explode in a confrontation that could change the fate of everyone involved. Laura, deeply troubled by the path her father, Antonio, has taken, makes a bold decision. She believes the only way to bring about real change is to draw attention to the case of racism that involved Rafael, the black boy who was rejected at the barbershop, and all the developments that followed. She, along with Ana, Rafael's mother, and Marcos, the activist and university professor, decide to organize a large peaceful protest in front of Gomez barbershop. The preparations for the protest are meticulous. Laura spends days trying to convince her friends and townspeople to join the demonstration. Although many support her quietly, few have the courage to take a public stand. Some fear retaliation, while others believe that confronting Antonio and his supporters will only increase the town's hatred. On the other hand, the activist group led by Marcos and Ana is determined to make the protest a milestone in peaceful resistance. They begin organizing banners, speeches, and support groups. The idea is not only to draw attention to the racism Rafael faced but also to the deeply rooted prejudices in the town. Ana, as a central figure in the fight, prepares an emotional and powerful speech in which she would detail the difficulties of raising a black son in a society that constantly devalues him. The day of the protest finally arrives. The morning begins tense, with an unusual silence hanging over the town. As the hours pass, the number of protesters starts to grow. The group of activists, made up of people of various races and ages, peacefully positions themselves in front of the barbershop. Banners with phrases like, "Racism is a crime," and "Equality now," are raised, and the atmosphere is charged with anticipation. However, across the street, a group of Antonio's supporters begins to gather. These men and women, mostly conservatives influenced by Antonio's and Pedro's racist rhetoric, start to assemble. The antagonistic atmosphere grows rapidly, and tension can be felt in the air. Antonio watches the protest from inside his barbershop, trying to maintain his composure. He feels confused, cornered by a situation he himself helped create. To him, his barbershop was a space where traditions and his personal values remained intact. He never imagined that refusing to cut a black boy's hair would trigger something so big. But now, with the nation's eyes on Santa Cruz, he realizes that his life has irrevocably changed. Inside the barbershop, Antonio watches the protesters, and while he feels anger, he also begins to feel something new, doubt. Could he really be right? Was all the suffering Rafael and his mother are going through his fault? These questions haunt his mind, but he fights to suppress any compassion. After all, admitting his mistake would mean renouncing everything he had believed for decades. Outside, Ana prepares to give her speech. She takes a deep breath, her heart racing, as she looks at the crowd. However, before she can step up to the makeshift stage, Antonio finally steps out of his barbershop, crossing the sidewalk with firm steps. He positions himself directly in front of the barbershop, facing the protesters. His supporters applaud his courage, while the activists wait in silence to see what he will do. With his eyes fixed on Ana and Rafael, who is standing beside her, Antonio begins to speak, his voice full of anger and frustration. "You all came here to destroy my life, my barbershop. All I've ever done is work hard to support my family, and now you want to tear it down over a misunderstanding?" He points at Rafael. "I've never been a racist. You're all blowing this out of proportion, making me out to be a monster." The crowd stirs, but no one responds. Ana stands firm, looking directly into Antonio's eyes without flinching. The tension rises. Laura, standing close to Ana, feels that this is the decisive moment, the instant when something could change. Laura finally decides to intervene. She approaches her father, her heart heavy with the weight of the history she carries. She is about to reveal everything she discovered about the dark past of the family and the legacy of racism that Antonio had unwittingly continued. "Dad, stop," she yells, her voice trembling but determined. "You're blinded by hatred, by tradition, by something that doesn't make sense. This has gone too far. You need to see what you're doing to these people, to me." Antonio is shocked to see his daughter standing among the protesters, which unsettles him even more. The confrontation between father and daughter becomes the focal point of the protest, with all eyes now fixed on them. "Laura, you don't understand," he tries to defend himself. "This isn't your world. These people are trying to destroy us. They don't want equality, they want power." "No, Dad, you're the one who doesn't understand. What you did to Raphael is just the beginning. This isn't about your business, it's about respect, about dignity. You always taught me to work hard, but you also taught me to be fair. And what you did was unfair." At this moment, a heavy silence falls over everyone. Antonio looks lost, as if he's being challenged not just by his daughter, but by his own conscience. Both sides of the crowd wait in anticipation, wondering what his next move will be. But before the silence can be broken peacefully, something unexpected happens. Pedro, the businessman and Antonio's ally, who had been watching everything from afar, realizes that things are slipping out of control. To him, Antonio is beginning to weaken, and his position as the hero of the resistance against the activists could fall apart. At that moment, Pedro decides to act on his own and throws a brick toward the crowd of protesters. The object hits Raphael hard on the head, knocking him to the ground immediately. Chaos erupts. Protesters scream, rushing to help Raphael, while Antonio's supporters begin to disperse, realizing the gravity of what just happened. Laura runs to Raphael's brother, screaming for help, while Antonio remains frozen, paralyzed by guilt. The peaceful protest was destroyed in seconds by an act of violence, and now everyone is in shock. This is the moment when Antonio finally realizes that his refusal to change, his racism, and his alliance with people like Pedro have brought about irreparable consequences. Pedro, determined to use the situation for his own ends, throws a brick at the crowd. The object hits Raphael in the head, knocking the boy to the ground. Chaos erupts. The peaceful protest turns into a scene of despair, with activists rushing to help Raphael and Antonio's supporters trying to hide Pedro. Ana, desperate, runs to her son, who is unconscious on the ground. Ambulances are called, and the protest dissolves into tears and anger. Antonio, seeing what his stance has caused, feels the weight of his guilt finally crash down on his shoulders. He runs to Ana and Raphael, trying to apologize, but it's too late. Pedro's actions, encouraged by Antonio's refusal to change, have brought about an irreversible tragedy. At the hospital, Raphael's condition is critical. He survives the attack but remains in a coma, and his recovery is uncertain. The entire town is shaken, and the story reaches national media. At this point, Antonio finally makes a decision. He turns himself into the police, confessing not only his racism but also all the dangerous connections he had with Pedro and the town's extremist groups. He hands over documents that prove the town's decades-long corruption and institutional racism, including the dark legacy of his father. Laura, devastated but also relieved, watches as her father finally confronts the truth. Antonio is arrested, and Pedro is also taken into custody, charged with attempted murder. The town of Santa Cruz begins, slowly, to heal from its wounds. The protest turns into a national movement against racism, inspired by Ana and Raphael's fight. And when Raphael finally wakes from his coma weeks later, he finds a town very different from the one that had rejected him. The story ends with renewed hope, but also with the scar that racism can wound deeply, even where it's least expected. Antonio pays for his crimes, but his transformation serves as a reminder that the road to change is long and often painful.